Okay, well, welcome to the CWCB Instream Flow Workshop. I don't think there's anyone else still waiting to get in. So I think we can get started. My name is Rob Veal. I am the section chief of the Stream and Lake Protection section of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And a few tips before we get started. We're going to have a couple different presentations today. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. Otherwise, we can have audio questions at the end of each presentation. So just a little bit about what's going to be presented today. So I'm going to go through a little bit about the Instream flow appropriation process and program, and have recommenders and recommendations for new appropriations. And then after that, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about Instream flow acquisitions and have a presentation on the ISF acquisition program and request for water from the Colorado Water Trust. So real quick, before I get too far into the new appropriations, I just wanted to speak a little bit about the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We're a state agency. We're the water planning agency within the state. If we hear CWCB, that's the abbreviation acronym we use pretty interchangeably. And the Stream Lake Protection section, where the Instream Flow Program resides, is just one of several different policy sections within the agency that range from administration operation to low interest loans for water projects to grants to interstate federal compacts, water supply planning with the water plan, and watershed and flood protection. So the CWCB is governed by 10 board of directors, 10 voting board of directors, 9 of which are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature. They represent 9 different basins within the state, and they serve for 3-year terms. You can see the breakout here in the slide of the different basins, one of which is the city and county of Denver, and the current representatives on the board. The 10th voting member is the director of the Department of Natural Resources, where the CWCB is housed, and that is Dan Gibbs. And then the board also has several non-voting members that provide advice to the board, and those include the director of the CWCB, Lauren Riss, Phil Weiser, the Attorney General, Jason Ullman, the State Engineer, Jeff Davis, the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Director, and Kate Greenberg, who is Director of the Department of Ag. So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about what in-stream flows are. So the Stream Lake Protection section, there's 2 different kinds of water rights that we can hold. One is in-stream flows, or ISFs, and the other is natural lake levels, NLLs. And they have some familiar features to other water rights within the state. They have a defined amount, usually in a cubic feet per second for in-stream flow water rights, and time. So they have periods, the starting and ending of that water right. Probably most importantly, they're administered within the state's water rights system. So new appropriations that we're talking about today wouldn't have appropriation dates until sometime in the near future. So they'd be junior to all the existing water rights within the state at the time of their appropriation. And they're recognized as a beneficial use. So in-stream flow use is a beneficial use within the state. So some unique features of the in-stream flow water rights are that they are non-consumptive, and they're for minimum flows on a stream, and they're for a reach. So there's an upper and lower terminus, or in a natural lake, there's a level that we look to protect. And the beneficial uses unique to the in-stream flow program is that it's preserved the natural environment. So in-stream flow water rights, what are they? So they're water rights held by the citizens of Colorado by the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and they're to preserve the natural environment to a reasonable degree. And so the program is a little over 50 years old, and since that time, there's been 1,700 water rights appropriated by the CWCB, as you can see in the map to the left here, and they cover over 9,000 miles of stream. As you can see, most of the CWCB's water rights are pretty high up in the watershed, usually in the headwaters area. But as the program has progressed, there's also been some other issue flows that go lower down in the basin as well. There's 8 people that work on the in-stream flow team. They're all listed here. So in the future, if you ever have any questions about an Instream flow, our website has our contact information and our titles, so you can feel free to contact any one of us to discuss any issues you have with Instream flows. I'm going to go into a little bit about the new appropriation process now. So as part of the new appropriation process, we have the workshop here, and I'm going to go through this kind of little diagram to kind of show you where we are in that process. The first thing that happens is an entity's conservation goal, followed by a recommendation formulation. Then we get to the Instream flow workshop where we are today. Then after that, staff goes through and staff from the CWCB develops a water availability assessment of the recommendation. Concurrently with that, CWCB staff has an outreach process. Then after the outreach process and the water availability assessment is done by CWCB staff, we go through a board process. And then finally, after the board process, we go through a water court process. And I'm going to go through each one of these steps individually in the next few slides. So first up is the recommended entities conservation goal. So this is probably a good time to point out that the CWCB doesn't make these recommendations. Recommendations can be brought to the CWCB by any entity. So in the past, we've had recommendations from federal agencies, local governments, cities, municipalities, nonprofit organizations, conservation groups, even some homeowner association. So any entity within the state of Colorado can provide a recommendation to the CWCB for an Instream flow water right. But the first thing they have to do is figure out what it is that they're trying to protect for. And so on the bottom of the screen here are just some examples of what an entity may be looking to protect. Maybe cutthroat trout habitat, it could be boreal toads, or it could be rare riparian communities that have been identified by the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. Or it could be the three species that are more warm water species. So once that first goal has been done of figuring out what it is that the entity wants to conserve, they'll work on formulating a recommendation. So they identify that natural environment, and the CWCB has broad discretion on what can be described as a natural environment. Here are lots of examples of where the natural environment has been determined in the past. It ranges from, cold water fish species, macroinvertebrates, amphibians, boreal toads. The picture in the middle is from Hanging Lake, and so that is for all the inappropriate flow for rare geologic features. So it could be any one of these can be identified as for protection of the natural environment. But what has to be done next is formulating what that recommendation would look like and quantifying what that recommendation would be. So first, you'd have to determine the site-specific needs of an Instream flow. So you'd have to determine where that conservation goal is that in relation to the stream reach, what would be an upper terminus, what would be a lower terminus. And that's where you would go and determine how to quantify for those Instream flow reaches as well. And so the picture on the left is an example of R2 cross being done. And R2 cross is a single transect model, and it models for three parameters, which are depth, velocity, and wetted perimeter. And so once R2 cross method has been done in the field, then you can be brought back to the office and you can do some computer analysis, and that helps develop a flow quantification for a recommendation. The next step after you have your initial recommendation kind of formulated is that you bring that recommendation to the Instream flow annual workshop. And so the Instream flow workshop is kind of a clearinghouse for entities to bring recommendations to the CWCB. And then the CWCB then starts the informal process of the outreach. And so leading up to these workshops, the recommenders that we have today, I don't really know all the recommendations that are going to be brought today. And so some of them I will see for the first time too. And so what happens after the workshop is A couple things. One of the things that we start to do is develop a water availability assessment of the reach of stream that is being considered by the recommendation. And so to do that, we use the best available data possible. And ideally, there would be a stream gauge located at the bottom of each proposed ISF recommendation with tons of data, but that's hardly the case. But we look at stream gauge analysis. If there's a lack of stream gauges in the area, we may install a temporary stream gauge to develop more idea about timing of the flows and quantity of the flows. We may use statistical models such as CSU flows or stream stats from the USGS. We also look at diversion records and additional information from talking with water commissioners and different water users. And so when we go through a water availability assessment, the first thing we'll do is look at the preliminary recommendation provided to the CWCB by the recommended entity. So in this hydrograph here, we can see the axes of stream flow and then also with date. This would be what a general recommendation would come to the CWCB looking like. It would have kind of 2 of 3 criteria identified in R2 cross for the base flow periods, possibly a little bump up in when snowmelt runoff starts, the high 3 criteria established in R2 cross, and then maybe possibly even a bump going down and then back to a base flow. And so what the CWCB will do is the staff will conduct its own water availability analysis. And in this example here, this is the hydrograph that staff was able to develop. And so from there, the CWCB staff will work with the recommended entity and make sure that the biological recommendation can still still accomplish the goals of the conservation with the stream flow that staff has determined is available. And so what we'll do is we'll then work with the recommended entities to come up with a recommendation that will meet the conservation goals and will suffice for that water is available for the appropriation as well. As staff is developing this water availability analysis, the other part that goes on is staff will start its outreach process. So the CWCB has an Instream flow subscription mailing list, which is about 1,200 people. Anyone can join the list and you can determine which water divisions you would want to receive notifications about. But we send notifications out to that subscription mailing list several times a year. Our Instream flow rules require it to be 60 days before it is brought in front of the board. But we provide notice several times throughout the year on the subscription mailing list. We'll hold stakeholder meetings. Specifically, we'll hold meetings with lots of Board of County Commissioners in the area where the stream recommendation is located. We'll put notices in local newspapers. We identify as best we can landowners adjacent to the Instream flow recommendation and provide letters to them. Then we also have consultation meetings with DWR as well. And so you can kind of see where we are in this process for this expanded timeline. So in the first part, I talked about the recommendation development, and that is where an entity goes out, collects field work, they identify what they want to try to protect, what is their conservation goal, come up with a quantification for an Instream flow, and then they present it to us here at this Instream flow workshop. And so that kicks off the staff analysis and outreach portion. So as I mentioned, we provide a couple notices to the Instream flow subscription mailing list. The first one we'll present is in March, and that will be identifying all the streams that are currently being investigated by the CWCB staff and the ones from this workshop as well. And then from there, we'll start our public outreach process. We'll actually have an item at the CWCB March meeting. And again, one in November as well. And that's when we'll send out another formalized notice to the ISF subscription mailing list before staff would seek the board to intend to appropriate anything. And so if the CWCB staff, after that, during that November time period, when we go to our board, we send out the notice saying that we will be moving forward with these Instream flow recommendations, then we go to the board and it starts a more formalized process that are described in the Instream flow rules. And the first thing that happens is every January or March, the these recommendations are brought to the CWCB. CWCB can vote to either approve or not the intent to appropriate. If they do form their intent to appropriate, it starts out the formalized notice and comment period identified in the in-stream flow rules, which includes public comment meeting at a CWCB meeting and ability to formally contest an appropriation. For any uncontested appropriations, in May, the board may choose to go through its final action and appropriate those water rights. And if there's a hearing, that would be sometime later in the fall, either in September or November. And for those contested appropriations, the board would vote whether or not to move forward with those recommendations as well and to appropriate them. And then after all that's done, the CWCB works with the Attorney General's office to file a water court application. So as you can see, it's a pretty lengthy process that at a minimum takes 3 years, but for most recommendations takes a longer time than that. Here's just an example of a water court application. As I mentioned, once the CWCB appropriates an in-stream flow water right and makes its final determinations, the CWCB works with the Attorney General's office to file an application in water court. And then we work through the water court process to get a decree. So as I also mentioned a little bit before, not every recommendation goes through in a one-year process of staff analysis. And so the next couple slides are just going to go through the ongoing ISF recommendations in the different water divisions that CWCB staff is still working on. So in Water Division 1, the CWCB is still working on some recommendations from CPW up in Larimer County on East Roaring Fork Creek, and then 2 down in Douglas County for West Plum Creek and Garber Creek, and then 1 out in Park County for Platte Gulch. In Water Division 2, we have 3 ongoing recommendations that we're working on. For Cottonwood Creek, there's actually 2 different Cottonwood Creeks, one from the CPW, one from the BLM, and then on East Gulch, which is trip to the Arkansas River. In Water Division 4, we're working on Pine Creek, which goes from the headwaters down to Moore Point Reservoir, and that's a CPW recommendation. And then Water Division 5, been working for several years on a recommendation on Deep Creek with American Rivers and the Eagle River Coalition. Moving on to Division 6, the CPW has several recommendations up in the White River Basin that we're continuing to work on, and along with some recommendations from the BLM that are off tributary to the Williams Fork and even further north up into the Willow Creek Basin. For information about any of the previous years, the recommendations can be found at the URL below. We haven't developed one for the 2026 recommendations, which the ones we're going to be talking about today will be, but that website will be the same as this, except it will be 2026 instead of 2025. And so once we receive the recommendations from the entities today, we'll work on putting that together and should have it completed before the March board meeting. And with that, I can start going over the new recommendations with the recommended entities. But as always, my contact information is up here. And I can pause for a second to see if there's any questions, or we can move into the recommenders themselves. Okay, not seeing any questions. Katie Birch from the CPW, are you ready to go? Would you like to start off?
Rob, if it's okay with you, maybe WRA could go before me.
Sure.
Thanks.
So we'll move on to WRA, and I see Julie Nania up there. I don't know if anyone else from WRA is on, but I can let you start off and introduce anyone else that may be presenting with you.
Rob, that sounds great. And Laura with WRA is on as well, and I think she'll be kicking things off. So I will go ahead though and pull up our presentation.
Great. Yep. And thanks. Thank you, Rob. That was a great overview. Really appreciate that. I think that was helpful. I'm Laura Belanger with Western Resource Advocates, and we are proposing an in-stream flow increase for an existing in-stream flow segment in the middle upper Taylor River in the Gunnison Basin. And as Julie just said, this was a collaborative project with Julie Nania and Jay Skinner, both of who have years and years of experience developing in-stream flow recommendations. And so they did most of the work or all of the work on this preliminary recommendation. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Julie, who will walk us through that.
Thanks, Laura. So we are introducing a recommendation in Water Division 4. So we're talking about the headwaters of the Gunnison Basin here. I like to give an overview of where we're situated. So the Taylor Park Reservoir is the top reservoir in the federal system. So it's right at the headwaters of the Gunnison. It's the primary reservoir that we use for our irrigation and other needs in the upper Gunnison Basin. And it is right close to the divide. If you've ever driven over Cottonwood Pass, you've probably driven through Taylor Park. As you can see from this map, it is an extensive basin. So the segment that we are talking about is a small portion of this. It is the portion that extends from our creek to Italian Creek. Zooming in a little bit, you can get a better idea of that segment. It's about 7.5 miles long. And there are 4 segments above the reservoir, and this is kind of couched in the middle of those segments. I always like when Rob goes first because he does a great job of introducing some of the concepts and evolution of in-stream flow rights in Colorado. Back in the day when we first started out with our in-stream flow statute, we tended to protect base flows for fisheries. So if you remember that top hat graph that he pulled up, mimicking the hydrograph, there was that base flow flat rate that tends to represent a winter flow. Well, this reach actually has an existing protection that does protect that base flow, but it lacks that seasonal variability to capture what's going on in the hydrograph throughout the rest of the year. So we decided to pursue this recommendation to try to build in that kind of upper top part of that top hat. It's a pretty charismatic basin up there. We've got a pretty standard high altitude fishery. CPW has done sampling up there, and brook and brown trout are the predominant fish that are hanging out in this segment. Something kind of remarkable about this reach is it is an outstanding water. So it got recent designation for the remarkable water quality up there. It's also got a really complex kind of wetland complex up there. And you can see in this photo some of the beaver ponds and other kind of habitat conditions that are in this basin as a whole. So Rob did a great job of introducing the R2 cross assessment too. On this presentation, I've also got Jay Skinner here. If folks have questions as we walk through how we did that analysis, he's also available to hop in. We collaborated on the data collection, and also Jay was the lead in running our modeling. So we were able to get out and actually do 4 different cross sections on this reach, which was a pretty good sampling. Through that, we were able to run some modeling, and one of the suggestions that we're looking at here, and I'll actually pull up this next chart because I think it gives the whole picture, really looks at building in that top hat. So you'll see that in these shoulder seasons, we are looking to bump the flow rates up. So starting in the March 16th to March 31st, we're bumping it up or requesting that it's bumped up to 16.4 CFS. So that's as that rising limb starts to kick in. The peak flow criteria that we're looking to hit is 22 CFS. So that's building in an additional 10 CFS for that period where we've really got that peaking flow rate for those habitat conditions, and then another step down in the fall. So once again, just to summarize, building in that top hat portion, a little bit of variability into this protection. We had some good data up there that we could look at when we were trying to ground truth some of our field assessment work. There is a gauge downstream from this reach that's Jay might be able to answer how long it's been. It's been there a long time. So we've got a really good record of what's going on above the reservoir up there. And when we were looking at that gauge data, it correlates really well with StreamStats too. And StreamStats is one of those modeling tools that Rob introduced that just really helps us look at that physical availability in the system. Similarly, it's a pretty straightforward recommendation in terms of legal availability. On this particular segment, there aren't any existing diversions. And I think this is a good segue into this next one. And that is primarily because it's really public land centric segment. 100% of this middle segment, the segment that we showed on the map, is Forest Service land. So it's got a little less development than some of the other reaches in the Upper Gunnison Basin. At the end of this, we always like to talk about some of our key stakeholders, folks that might be interested in this recommendation moving forward. We have the U.S. Forest Service as the primary landholder on the reach. Gunnison County, the CWCB always does a good job of reaching out to our county commissioners to let them know what's going on in the basin. And also the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. They are the local district that plays a role in managing the water resources of the Upper Gunnison Basin. That is the quick overview of this proposal. We've got Jay Skinner on here too, so if folks have any questions, we'd be happy to try to field those.
Thank you, Julie. Any questions for Laura, Jay, or Julie? And I guess while you're thinking about that, I just want to point out one thing too, if it wasn't clear in my presentation, that this would be an increase, but it would be a new separate water right that would have a new junior appropriation date. So it wouldn't really have any appropriation date related to the original ISF. It would be for a new junior appropriation just for those amounts that Julie described.
Right on. Well, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, Katie, are you ready?
I'm ready, thank you. Sorry for the minor blip. Hopefully you can see my slides. Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Birch. I'm the Instream Flow Program Coordinator for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and I will briefly cover CPW's Instream Flow efforts that are upcoming in this coming year. And this photo is a picture of a bluehead sucker that it actually was bigger than the photo alludes to. It was a really beautiful looking fish. Very attractive. Let's see. So CPW participates in the Instream Flow program for a couple of reasons. Our statutory charge is that wildlife and their environment are to be protected, preserved, enhanced, and managed for the use, benefit, and enjoyment of the people of the state and its visitors. And more specifically, we have a strategic planning document that directs staff and how we do our work, and it directs us to conserve wildlife and their habitats to ensure healthy, sustainable populations and ecosystems. Specifically calling out in-stream flows. So we see this partnership with the CWCB as really complementary to our mission and charge, and we are super appreciative of the work and continuing that collaborative partnership. So I'll paint a picture of where we're working throughout this coming year. We have in-stream flows in Division 1, a couple in the headwaters. We have an in-stream flow recommendation in the Arkansas Basin, kind of coming out of the Sangre de Cristos to the east. 2 in-stream flows in the Upper Animas, a couple of ongoing efforts in the Gunnison Basin and White Basin, and then a new in-stream flow in the Yampa. Our work has really been focusing on fisheries that have high conservation value. Many of these are native cutthroat streams. And then this year we've got a couple of warm water, important native plains fisheries. And so we do that, to leverage the local knowledge contained by our aquatic biologists. And then we also continue to work with any interested partners. So if anyone is interested, please reach out and we're happy to offer our expertise. as we have capacity. And then amidst all of that in the backdrop, we also have a couple of in-stream flows that were noticed at past workshops, not necessarily high conservation value, but important sport fisheries that we're going to continue to plug away on. So here's a list of those ongoing in-stream flow recommendations. Rob covered this, so I won't get into the details, but we try to fill in the gaps of the interstitial space by continuing to do this work on these streams. But I'll talk about what we're going to focus on in the coming year and what we're likely to see towards the fall. West Plum Creek is a tributary of the South Platte above Chatfield Reservoir. It's home to a very important native plains fishery. It's kind of the last of its kind. These transition zone fisheries are this unique temperature range to support native plains fish. And a lot of these streams that come off the foothills onto the plains of the South Platte just have not been left intact in the way West Plum Creek has. So it supports northern red-bellied dace, that little fish on the left, and then common shiner, which is a little fish with a giant eye that's state threatened. I should say northern red-bellied dace is state endangered. And then northern leopard frog, which is a tier 1 species of greatest conservation need for the state. So it supports these 3 super important species and then a host of other warm water species that are identified in the State Wildlife Action Plan. And it's a really unique and diverse assemblage of native plains fish that exist here. So that's why CPW is pursuing an in-stream flow. We also kind of kicked off a stream management planning group in 2020 to look at some of these factors that are risks to these fish. So recently we completed phase 1 of the technical report, which basically identifies flow and temperature regime considerations, some of these fish passage impediments, and the hope is that we can, through the in-stream flow, leverage some of that science and outreach that's being conducted by the stream management planning group. The watershed is almost entirely private lands, and CPW had some existing relationships with some of the landowners. So we were able to gain access, but there's a lot of landowners that the stream management planning folks have been working to engage and educate about the importance of the fishery. So in-stream flows would be kind of a separate complementary group that works on this project. And I'll just pause to say this map also shows some gauges that were deployed by Laura Corona. Thank you, Laura. And we have this good data from the past couple of years to look at how much water is available in a water availability investigation. Oops. So I'll just kind of briefly talk about what we have going as far as biological flow recommendations on West Plum Creek. This is a 23-mile stretch, and so we're probably going to segment it into a couple of discrete in-stream flow reaches. The first, which would extend from the headwaters of West Plum Creek, probably down to Bear Creek. And we have 5 cross sections in that stretch and looking at maybe, 1.1 CFS during the base flow period, about 3 CFS during the high flow period. And this is all, data that was collected and may be further refined as we continue on this path. And the next stretch would be from the confluence of Bear Creek, which is the pink line, down to the confluence of Jackson Creek. We also have about 5 cross sections collected over the past 5 years in that stretch, and a slightly larger bankful top width as you move down the channel, not surprising, and slightly higher flow recommendations to protect fish passage. So there, our 2 cross would show a need for about 1.3 CFS during base flow and about 2.6 CFS during the high flow period. And then the last segment is one that we have the least amount of information on. We had limited landowner access, but we would likely recommend from Jackson Creek to East Plum Creek. We might shorten that reach at the Sedalia gauge, which is at the bottom of the reach. And that shows about 1.65 CFS needed during the base flow period and about 2 CFS needed during the high flow period. We may refine this with some additional data collection in 2025. So what's next? We're going to continue to engage with some of the local interest there in the watershed. The landowners are really concerned about stream flows and some of the declines that they've seen, and they really want to actually see the status quo protected. So CPW has some good partners, and we're going to continue to work with them to see if we can build some trust about an in-stream flow and how it could actually help what they're interested in. And then we're going to continue or start work on water availability with the CWCB. It's a complex system with some springs and some diversions and lots of changed water rates. So that's going to be on deck for the coming year. And then moving kind of down to the opposite end of the state, this is Pando Creek, which is up on Coalbank Pass outside of Durango. It's a tributary to Cascade Creek and the upper Animas above Durango. And this is a first order stream. It's super steep, and CPW is working to reestablish San Juan cutthroat in this stream. And the San Juan cutthroat are a pretty rare lineage of Colorado River cutthroat trout. CPW is working to reestablish populations of these fish. And Pando Creek was a stream that we're doing that. So it makes perfect sense that we would want flow protection on this important stream segment. So in 2024, we collected some R2 cross data. I haven't had time to process those results and present on them. But we're going to be collecting additional data in 2025 and to move that forward. And then a sister stream just downstream is Mill Creek. It's tributary to Cascade Creek, kind of below Highway 550. And this is a picture of Mill Creek. We'll similarly quantify R2 cross in 2025 and recommend these together since they're similar. And yes, two streams that CPW is really focused on conserving. And so the last new stream we've got is on Lost Dog Creek. This is up in the Yampa Basin. This is a tributary of the North Fork Elk River. CPW's been working on a reclamation project to reestablish Colorado River cutthroat trout of the Yampa Green lineage. And this is a stream that has an existing in-stream flow of 5 CFS. And as Rob and Julie described, we're looking at this stream thinking, is 5 CFS protective? And you can tell that it sees a lot of flows during the high flow period. So we went out and investigated that in 2024. And lo and behold, it shows that, 5 CFS isn't necessarily protective during the high flow period. So we're going to be looking at a seasonal enlargement up to about 8.6 CFS with some additional data collection in 2025. The stream is, as you can see, got a ton of wood, a ton of complex habitat. So it's a really great place for cutthroat, and a stream CPW really wants to see fully protected with an in-stream flow. And that's all I've got for this presentation. Thanks for the time, and I'm happy to take questions now or at the end.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions for Katie? Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to have Lisa Bright-Unger from the CWCB. She's a water resource specialist with us, and she's going to talk a little bit about in-stream flow acquisitions.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Bright-Unger. I work for the Colorado Water Conservation Board, otherwise known as the CWCB, in the Stream and Lake Protection section. I'm a water resource specialist for acquisitions. Today, I'm going to talk about the in-stream flow acquisitions. There are two types of in-stream flow water rights, appropriations and acquisitions. You've just heard about the appropriations, but I'll just mention that they are where an in-stream flow is put to beneficial use as a completely new water right to preserve the natural environment to a reasonable degree. For in-stream flow acquisitions, the CWCB acquires existing decreed water rights or contractual interests in water from willing owners by purchase, donation, lease, or loan to preserve and/or improve the natural environment to a reasonable degree. One difference of the acquisition from the appropriation is that the appropriation can be used to preserve the natural environment, while the acquisition can preserve and improve the natural environment. To evaluate, process, and maintain acquisitions, we have lots of partners. Here are some of the nonprofit organizations that we work with: Colorado Water Trust, Western Resource Advocates, Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratories, and some of the government organizations include Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, water districts, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, City of Boulder, and Pitkin County. The CWCB works with our project partners along with voluntary sellers and donators to evaluate their water rights and to assist owners with managing the acquisition process. Who sells or donates their water rights? Farmers and ranchers, cities, counties, landowners, federal, state, and local agencies, and conservation groups. And here we have a good picture that shows a perfect example of when we need an in-stream flow. The CWCB acquires water on a permanent or temporary basis to use the senior water rights priority date, so the acquired right is not based on the current date. As a split season, meaning irrigation is used for part of the season and fallow operations occur during in-stream flow use. And can compensate sellers for their water rights. The CWCB has funds available for water acquisitions in their construction fund and species conservation trust fund. Types of acquisitions. Each water acquisition transaction is unique, and the particular operating conditions are included in a separate agreement that is developed by the applicant and CWCB. The different kinds of acquisitions are permanent or long-term, which needs water court approval; temporary, which has an administrative approval process that goes through the Division of Water Resources. And then there's other types of acquisitions like augmentation of stream flow and protected mitigation releases. The main thing to know is that for all of our acquisitions, there's no injury to other water rights. In order to process the acquisitions, there are statutes that need to be followed. The in-stream flow statutes are found under Title 37, Water and Irrigation. The main statute for permanent or long-term acquisitions is 3792-102. It establishes the in-stream flow and natural lake level program and how the board implements the program. The main statute for temporary and expedited loans is 3783-105. It authorizes water rights owners to loan water to the CWCB for in-stream flow use and set forth procedures for obtaining state engineer approval of such loans. These statutes can be found on the CWCB website on the Public Information tab. Along with the statutes, there are also regulations that need to be followed for the acquisitions. The Code of Colorado Regulations contains rules concerning the Colorado in-stream flow and natural lake level program. These rules are found under Regulation 2 CCR 408-2, and specifically for in-stream flow acquisitions, it is Rule 6. The rules can also be found on the CWCB website under the Public Information tab. During the review process, we get assistance from other divisions under the Department of Natural Resources. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife provides recommendations and sometimes either reviews or develops a biological analysis for the acquisition. And the Colorado Division of Water Resources determines if the in-stream flow is administrable and also gives administrative approval for any of the temporary loans. Each acquisition is evaluated for appropriateness. Factors for the board to consider are reach of stream where acquired water will be used, historical use and return flows, effect on interstate compact issues, potential for material injury to existing decreed water rights. Elements of the permanent and long-term acquisitions are donation, lease, or purchase, must obtain water court approval to use the water for in-stream flow purposes. The acquired water rights beneficial use is changed to add in stream flow as a use and the senior priority date is kept. Split season can be utilized where irrigation still occurs for part of the season and fallow operations occur during use of the in-stream flow. Donor or seller can retain right to use water under certain approved circumstances, like for drought provisions. Approval process takes 2 CWCB board meetings, may require a special hearing, and then goes through the water court process. Here's an example of a permanent acquisition. The City of Boulder donated senior water rights to maintain in-stream flows in Boulder Creek through the city. Also, there's a provision for when there are drought conditions to allow them to use the in-stream flow water. And for an example of a long-term contractual acquisition, it is with Pitkin County through a trust agreement where they loan senior water rights on Maroon Creek, a tributary to the Roaring Fork River, for 50 years. Elements of the temporary leases. No water court change is necessary. The state engineer can approve a temporary in-stream flow use if there is no injury to other water rights. Once again, the split irrigation season can be used for temporary leases. Temporary leases can be used for direct flow or storage releases from reservoirs. Approval process takes 2 CWCB board meetings, may require a special hearing, and then also goes through an administrative process with the Division of Water Resources. This is how the temporary leases are structured. The in-stream flow can be used for a period of 120 days in a year. It is for 5 years of use over a 10-year period. And in that 10-year period, it can only be used for 3 consecutive years. It has a 10-year period that can be renewed 2 times, which means the lease can last up to 30 years. And last is the expedited lease. It is a 1-year term and can be applied to the 5 and 10 lease as the first year of use. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Lisa. Next up, we have Daniel Schneider from the Colorado Water Trust, who's been a great partner with the CWCB. And Danielle's going to be talking about the request for water process. So thank you, Danielle.
Thanks. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. Sorry, 1 second. There's something like extremely distracting in my screen. Okay, now it's gone. Okay. Hey everyone, my name's Danielle Snyder and I work for the Colorado Water Trust and I am a water transactions coordinator. So every year we kind of go through an outreach push just to let folks know that we exist and what we do. And so that's kind of what I'll be explaining to you today. So for my presentation, it's broken down into 3 parts. So the first, I'll just let you know who we are and tell you a little bit about what we do. Second, I'll describe our request for water process and what that looks like. And then third, I will kind of explain our like 3-step internal process for the request for water process, and then explain just some tools and examples that we have kind of in our toolkit. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with us, but for those of you that are not, I will kind of give you some background. So we're a Colorado nonprofit that works statewide, and we specialize in restoring stream flows to Colorado's rivers. We got started in 2001 when a group of water lawyers and engineers got together and decided to work together to amplify the state's in-stream flow program. Today, we still work closely with the Instream flow program, but we also utilize a wide variety of mechanisms in our work that sometimes don't often include the Instream flow program. And so just to go into transactions a little bit, like the work that we do is certainly as distinct or, as Julie said, charismatic as the water rights and watersheds that we work with. So the type of transactions that we deal with often require creative and collaborative thinking. And this is why the Water Trust employs water attorneys and technical staff, so we can do a lot of that work in-house. And then finally, we work entirely within the water appropriation system, and we compensate water rights holders at fair market value for using their water for stream flow restoration. And then here's a little bit of stats on our work. So we've successfully completed 27 projects around the state, which you can see their locations on this map with these like colored balloons. And then these projects have added about 82,000 acre feet to local rivers and streams on a little over 800 stream miles throughout the state. So our work is entirely on a voluntary basis. We don't target water rights owners or particular streams for work. So it's really important for folks to know who we are and for us to do this outreach. So if people want to work with us, they can. And our annual outreach process is called the request for water process. And I'm going to explain a little bit about that right now. So our request for water process is outreach, like invites water rights owners who are curious in water conservation and stream flow restoration with their water rights. And they can do this by submitting a preliminary offer to the Water Trust. So when someone, I just wanted to note that when someone submits an offer to us, it doesn't commit their water right in any way to a project with us or anyone else. It's just basically an invitation for for us, the Water Trust, to evaluate the water rights owner's water portfolio and to discuss potential environmental transactions to benefit the region. And then this evaluation is done at no cost to the water rights owner, and it's as confidential as the water rights owner would like it to be. So we start our process when someone submits a water right, just with kind of some initial evaluation, just kind of minimum requirements for us to work with water rights. So we prefer them to have a decreed diversion rate of over 0.5 CFS or a storage right of over 20 acre feet. It's highly beneficial for the water right to have a good history and record of use, and that the owner of these water rights, if we do collaboratively decide to do a project, that they're willing to change their operations. And then we don't accept conditional water rights, groundwater rights, springs, or anything on the abandonment list. So here's a basic timeline of the request for water work. Generally, we begin our outreach at the beginning of the year. And I think we used to do a cutoff of like submissions by June, but we've just found that given the dynamic process of this effort, like we accept offers year round. And then generally turnaround time for getting a response from us and just figuring out what your options are. If you do decide to submit an offer, is about a 2 to 3 month turnaround in terms of something where you know, like, either we can do the project or we can't, or we can, but here's options. So yeah, and then that obviously just depends on workload within our team. We're a team of 7, just so you know. But yeah, so if any of this is of interest to you, here's our website for the Request for Water program. It's a wealth of information, and including the application to submit a request. And yeah, we're available for phone call or email anytime. So give us a call. So in the next part of the presentation, I'm going to describe how the Water Trust evaluates water rights once someone decides to make a preliminary offer and they meet these sort of minimum requirements that I had described earlier. And we can kind of summarize that in a 3-step process. And I'm going to start with the first step. So the first step is we locate where on the natural stream the water right comes from. And then from there, we evaluate the stream's hydrology to determine whether it does actually need flow in time or place. So here, for example, on this graph, you can see the stream kind of crashes below this target flow, which can sometimes be, an in-stream flow rate, and in both wet and dry years. And then the stream flow kind of recovers in this like mid-August timeline. And I just want to point out, this is a June through August on the x-axis here. So the dry stream where the hydrograph dips below the target looks something kind of like this picture in the upper left here. You can see just a bunch of rocks exposed, not great for fish passage. And then in the picture on the right, you can see there's some boosted flows. And so you can see that the stream has the ability to recover. Sometimes flow data isn't always available. And so when we're investigating this question of, is the stream in need, we'll reach out to the CPW aquatic biologists or just like folks who know the stream intimately and can get us information there as well. So now that we know that the stream in fact is in need and when and where it occurs, we move on to looking at the water right. So when we start to dig into the water right, we look into the kind of nitty-gritty stuff. So the decree and the record of use. And we then compare that water right with the time and place on the stream that there is a need. And then we look to see if we can identify whether changing operations of the water right can in fact help restore flows to the stream. So for example, in this picture, you can see I think it's probably pretty hard to see, but there's a diversion dam here and there's a pump here just downstream. And this diversion in the graph here corresponds to this reach on the river. So you can see here's the target flow, and then this is a hydrograph, or kind of, actually it's different, it's a river mile graph, but you can see when the diversion is occurring, the stream drops below the target flows. But if you chose not to divert, it would stay above these target flows. So that's kind of our next step, is just determining if this water right will benefit the stream in need. Okay, so then once we figured out those two things, we can go to our toolbox. So once we have a good understanding of the local stream need, and if in fact we think that water right will help meet the timing and location of the need, and changing the operation is in fact an option, it's time for us to figure out which tool to use. And we have a whole suite of tools available to us, which Lisa had explained several of them, but I wanted to break them down into kind of 3 categories. We have permanent, flexible, and temporary. I'm not gonna go into explaining all these tools because it's kind of a lot, but I'll go into some explanations and just some real life examples of these tools. And I know Lisa had kind of gone into some of these, so I might skip over some of the explanations or just kind of be a little more brief with it. So yeah, with that said, I'm going to highlight these 4 tools highlighted here. So the first is permanent acquisition, and it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. And it's a sale donation of water rights that's permanently changed in water court for in-stream flow use by the CWCB. So this diagram here kind of represents like a typical situation on a river with appropriated water rights. You have your irrigation rights, so your 1800s rights, your 1900s rights, municipal supplies, stock water, and stream flow. So when you acquire a right, or the CWCB will take that water right to water court, change this irrigation right, which is the right in question, to add in-stream flow use, and then it maintains that priority date. So a real life example we have of that is the McKinley Ditch on the Little Cimarron River. So this project started in 2014 when Western Rivers Conservancy acquired a portion of the McKinley Ditch water rights and the land. They conveyed the land to the Water Trust, and they gave the land to a private rancher in the region. So the Water Trust went to Water Court to add in-stream flow as a use to the existing agricultural decree. And then we also operate a split season water use agreement with both the CWCB and the rancher on the property. So this agreement allows the water to be utilized in the spring and early summer by the irrigator for irrigation. And then once the flows on the Cimarron, or if the flows on the Cimarron drop below target levels, the CWCB can use that water for in-stream flow in the late summer and fall. So currently the Water Trust is wrapping up necessary infrastructure improvements, and that should allow limited use of the in-stream flow, hopefully this summer in 2025. The next tool that I'll talk about is a temporary loan to in-stream flow, and Lisa did a wonderful explanation of this, so I won't dive in, but it is a temporary tool, less administration involved than like a permanent long-term loan. Some basics are you can operate the tool 5 out of 10 years, but not 3 consecutive. So here you can see in years, this is a year graph, like a year chart. And in years 1, 4, 6, 9, and 10, the flows were in theory operated, and you can see it's not 3-year consecutive. Another cool thing about this tool is that it can be renewed for 2 additional 10-year periods. So even though it's a temporary tool, it can be used for almost 30 years. Okay, so real life example of the in-stream flow, temporary in-stream flow loan is, so we use stored water, in Stagecoach Reservoir to boost flows on the Yampa. And in 2022, we partnered with the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District to implement a 5 and 10 temporary loan, which also brought in the first ever improve rate that was approved by the CWCB. So the loan was actually operated for the first time in 2024, so this past summer, and we released a total of 5,100 acre-feet from Stagecoach Reservoir under this temporary lease for in-stream flow. This graph here shows the date range of which we were making releases this last summer. So we released between July 30th and October 20th. And our flows that we had released out of Stagecoach for in-stream flow ranged from about 10 CFS to 67. So the chart on here shows improve rates in this light blue line, and then preserve rates in this dark blue line here. And then this gray polygon shows estimated gauge flows below Stagecoach, kind of without the in-stream flow releases. And then the blue bit here is the actual flow on the river. So you can, this blue is kind of where you can see like what the in-stream flow releases were, like the amount in the river at the time. You can see that river didn't really drop below the preserve rates a whole lot, maybe a few days in that period. So, and it accounted for a lot of the river flows in the region, on that Reach River. So, yeah, that's a project we're really proud of. It takes a lot of coordination and, to get this thing done. So, yeah. All right. So the next tool I'll talk about, and I'll get into this one a little more than I did the other ones, is the stream flow augmentation plan. And so stream flow augmentation plan works by adding water to the natural stream and protecting it in the stream when and where it's needed. So this added water is decreed for augmentation, and it's not historically in the stream at time and place. So it's able to essentially boost the flows of what it would be otherwise. And then in a protected reach, sorry. And then after the water passes through the protected reach, it's available for diversion for decreed uses or becomes just a part of the natural stream flow. So this is a simplified diagram that shows the stream flow augmentation, how an augmentation plan might work. The augmentation water is the seed water, which essentially sits kind of at the bottom of the stream and keeps the flows at 8 CFS in the defined reach where it would drop generally down to 4 CFS otherwise. So, and then at the same time, existing diverters can divert as they would historically, and then there's more water in the stream below the protected reach that can be used by downstream users. And, as with all augmentation plans, it takes a bit to just really get your head wrapped around the concept. But it's a really interesting tool because it can bring together a lot of different water sources and water users, and just at its core is like a multi-benefit tool. So a real life example that we're participating in is the Pooter Flows project. And the Pooter Flows project seeks to restore flows on the Pooter River between the canyon mouth of the Pooter all the way down to the confluence with the South Platte. So that's 57 river miles. So the project is, as you can imagine, is like very complex, involves multiple sources of augmentation water, several different river reaches with unique flow limits, and 7 different partnering organizations in both ag and municipal industries. So this figure here just shows the preliminary engineering and the locations of the gauges, the protected reaches, the underlying preserve and improve flow rates for those reaches, and where augmentation water is available to boost flows in the stream. So partners in this project are currently seeking approval on the water court as we speak. They filed an application for the stream flow augmentation plan in 2021. Okay, and finally, I'll get to my last tool, which is a water conservation program. And I just want to mention that water conservation programs are outside of the in-stream flow program and are generally not used in partnership with the CWCB, just because they don't utilize in-stream flow. But that can always change, right? So the nice thing about water conservation programs is that they're pretty low barrier to entry, and they have a fairly simple approval process, depending on the approval entity. And, it doesn't require water court or anything like that. And so they're approved by water providers, state agencies, and other entities authorized by the state for approval of this type of project. They don't require an in-stream flow reach for use, which I already said. And so non-diversion under water conservation programs is protected in 5 out of 10 years, so similar to a temporary loan from abandonment, and then it also safeguards historical consumptive use. Water conservation programs, some downsides, I guess, are so the water can't be shepherded, and they currently can't be utilized in Division 7. So what this can look like in practice is a diverter can voluntarily turn off water at a critical time to leave water in the stream, And if there's no downstream diverters for a couple river miles, that reach of stream can be benefited with additional flows. Yeah. And then my example here is the Cold Mountain partnership that we had with the Cold Mountain Ranch on the Crystal River. So Colorado Water Trust partnered with Bill Fales, this guy here, owner of the Cold Mountain Ranch, a producing ag operation, and they divert water from the Crystal River. So in 2018, we signed a contract with the Colorado River District and Bill, and this agreement agrees to compensate Bill when they coordinate their diversions to boost flows on the Crystal River. And that's, you know, we're chatting with Bill and looking at flows and looking at snowpack and chatting with him pretty early on before irrigation season goes to see like if he in fact wants to operate the project and if we believe the Crystal will be in need that year. So far the project has operated twice, once in 2022 and once again in 2024, resulting in more than 200 acre feet of flow restoration. And Bill has been compensated for that water. I don't have an exact amount, but I know we've been giving him money. I think there was like a $5,000 signing bonus, and he gets paid for every day that he does not divert, with like a maximum of $30,000 in payment. Then yeah, I wanted to touch on compensation. So we offer compensation to project partners when it's requested. And we offer the compensation based on market-based evaluations of the water right to determine that compensation amount. You know, this amount varies widely from basin to basin, just like home prices vary widely from throughout the state. So yeah, I've touched this a couple times, but I wanted to just reiterate, engaging in projects with us, you know, protect against abandonment, safeguard HCU, historical consumptive use, and help the local stream out as well. With that, I just want to draw my presentation to a close, just kind of give you a recap. You know, the Water Trust is a nonprofit organization that specializes in restoring stream flow to rivers. Each year we do a request for water outreach effort. If you're interested in seeing if your water rights do in fact or can in fact be a part of this program, fill out a form, give us a call. And then I went through our whole process internally, what it looks like for us. So yeah, I'm here for questions. Here's my contact info. Here is a contact info of our executive director, Kate Ryan. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Danielle. Once again, the Water Trust is a great partner with the CWCB, so thank you for giving that detailed presentation. Are there any questions for Danielle? Okay, well, Danielle is also our last presentation as well. So if anybody has any other overreaching questions, this would be a good time to ask. If there aren't any questions, this presentation will be available online once we get the 2026 appropriation page on our website created. And as always, if there's any questions, feel free to contact any of the people that provide their information on the presentation today.
And I just wanted to say hi on camera because I realized that my camera didn't go on, so I'm here.
Thank you.
Laura, are you able to unmute people to see if there are any questions that they want to say?
Everyone should be able to unmute themselves right now.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jay Simon. I'm on the board of the Western Slope Conservation Center. I also live on the Smith Fork of the Gunnison. From what I see here, it seems fairly obvious that if for getting in-stream flows in the headwaters where there is no irrigation diversions, that's fairly easy, I would guess, to get minimum in-stream flows. But then as you go in and you're dealing with people with water rights, my concern, I guess, is, okay, you get water rights from one rancher and it's going to go down a certain stretch of river, but then someone, like I think what the one said, maybe you could get a water right that was from the 1900s. And so now that water's flowing down the river, but then now someone with a junior right, see, there's more water there that possibly he wouldn't have had if the guy with the senior right was taking it. Now the guy with the junior right downstream can now take it. So how do you compensate for that?
So I get, I'm trying to gather the question together in my mind. And so you were talking about how the downstream users are compensated, or how it would work. So I guess just to provide a few examples, that for water right acquisitions, when the water right is acquired, for permanent ones, there's an HCU analysis that's done. And so the historically consumed water, it would not be available to downstream users. And that water would be shepherded past their headgets potentially. Is that the kind of question, Jay, that you're getting to?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering then how are you able to assign for that? You know, just from gauges that you have there, or how do you know that somebody isn't taking it?
Yeah, that's when we'd have to work in partnership with the Division of Water Resources if there will be shepherding water downstream. And as you state, there would be required to be gauges to be able to measure the flow as it's moving down the stream.
Okay. Appreciate
Lisa or Kayla, if you want to add anything onto that.
What? Yeah.
Sounds about right. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so last call for questions. Like I said, otherwise our contact information is in the presentation, which will be posted on the CWCB website. So not hearing any further questions. Thank you everyone for spending your time today with us. And hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Laura, for your help with this. Hopefully, we'll be able to post the recording sometime soon.
Awesome. Yes, and it's also on Anna Porter's portal of it as well. Rob.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.